The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the long expanse of the California rifle range. The concrete glowed like a skillet under the heat, and the air shimmered with waves of distorted light. Sergeant Miller, barely old enough to contemplate a mortgage, smirked at his squad mates. They were armed with the pinnacle of modern marksmanship, carbon fiber bipods, rifles equipped with ballistic computers, and high-end scopes that could practically calculate the trajectory for them. They stood in a loose semicircle, waiting for the Reaper's Gauntlet 5 steel targets, ranging from 800 to 1,200 yards, multiple firing positions. 90 seconds of relentless precision. No one had cleaned it in 3 years. Then the old man appeared, Bruce Warren, 83, moved with a deliberate slowness that belied decades of experience. His faded blue jeans and worn red leather jacket seemed out of place under the harsh California sun. His hands, lined and weathered, rested gently over the polished walnut stock of his M1, a rifle, a civilian version of the M14 he had carried in another lifetime. The steel bore the small scars and scratches of a long and storied life. "Sir, with all due respect," Miller began, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is a live-fire exercise for active-duty personnel. That thing," he gestured at Bruce's rifle, "belongs in a museum. Not on my range." The young Marine snickered behind him, amused by the apparent incongruity of a frail old man in their world of cutting-edge technology. Bruce didn't speak immediately. His pale blue eyes, lined with decades of experience, scanned the range calmly. "I was invited," he said finally, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of decades of authority and quiet confidence. The invitation had come from a general he had mentored years ago. A simple favor for a quiet afternoon of shooting, now intersecting awkwardly with the platoon's most grueling qualification day. Invited to what? Miller scoffed. "Watch. We're about to run the gauntlet. You'd be lucky to even hit paper with that relic." Laughter rippled through the younger Marines, their arrogance palpable, their pride in modern technology evident. The contrast between their sleek tactical rifles and Bruce's scarred wooden stock M1A seemed comedic to them. "I'd like to try," Bruce said, the 3 words cutting through the laughter like a slab of granite. The mirth vanished. The young Marines hadn't expected seriousness. Miller's smirk tightened, irritation flickering across his face. "Look, Grandpa," he said, dropping any pretense of respect, "I don't have time for this. Pack up your antique and go find the VFW hall. Maybe they've got bingo starting soon." Bruce continued his preparation unfazed. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic. He pulled a worn leather shooting glove onto his left hand, laid down a simple canvas mat, and produced a small, dog-eared notebook from his belt. He didn't consult a digital rangefinder. Instead, he measured the wind by observing the shimmer over distant targets and letting a pinch of dust sift through his fingers. The process was slow, methodical, and profoundly analog, drawing a mixture of pity and fascination from the young Marines. Miller, losing patience, stepped forward. "It's a safety hazard. You're not qualified. Your time is up." Bruce paused, looking up for the first time with a flicker of deep, tired resolve in his eyes. "Son," he said quietly, but the steel beneath his tone was unmistakable, "I was qualifying on rifles like this before your father was born. Are you going to let me shoot, or do I have to make a phone call?" Miller flushed red, his authority challenged by a civilian octogenarian in front of his men. Before confrontation could escalate, Gunnery Sergeant Davis intervened. The permanent rangemaster, a man whose face bore the map of countless deployments, cut through the tension with unwavering authority. "He's cleared. Run 192 for him. Then the range is yours." Miller scowled, but knew better than to argue. The Gauntlet was about to witness a master at work. Bruce lay down on the mat, thumb brushing the crescent-shaped gouge in his stock. A relic of a long-ago battle, he took a deep breath, letting the world narrow to the reticle in his scope and the shimmering mirage of the first target 800 yards away for a moment. The California desert faded, replaced by the humid, suffocating jungle of his youth. Rain pattered on leaves, mud soaked his boots, and explosions rumbled around him. Master Sergeant O'Connell's words echoed, "You don't aim it. You will it to the target." Then, with absolute calm, Bruce exhaled, pressed the trigger, and the first shot rang out. The Gauntlet had begun. The desert seemed to hold its breath as Bruce exhaled, feeling the weight of decades in every muscle of his body. The first shot echoed across the range, a deep, resonant boom that contrasted sharply with the sharp cracks of the younger Marines' modern rifles. The steel target, 800 yards away, rang with a metallic ping. Murmurs rippled through the recon squad. What had seemed like a fragile, antique man moments ago now held an almost magnetic authority. Sergeant Miller's jaw clenched. His pride, built on youth and technology, bristled under Bruce's calm precision. The old man didn't flinch under the scrutiny. Instead, he began the meticulous process of preparing for the next shot. Each movement was a ritual, adjusting the rifle's elevation with a soft click, feeling the breeze shift, letting intuition guide the minute corrections. The digital instruments in the hands of the Marines would have taken several adjustments to compensate for the gusting wind. Yet Bruce needed nothing beyond his senses honed over a lifetime. "Crosswind at 5, a corporal whispered, noting Bruce's subtle hand movements. "He can read it without the computer." The other Marines exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence beginning to falter. As Bruce lined up the second target at 950 yards, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the range. His breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm, the echo of the first shot still resonating in the back of his mind. With a final, almost imperceptible adjustment, he squeezed the trigger. Ping! Another perfect hit. A hush fell, not the respectful silence of a disciplined squad, but a stunned, almost fearful quiet. The youngest Marines fidgeted, their hands twitching instinctively toward their rifles. They had assumed that the old man's attempts would be nothing more than a historical curiosity. Now, reality demanded they acknowledge that history itself had walked onto their range. Alive and breathing, Bruce moved to the third target. 1,000-yard shot partially obscured by a small rise. The wind shifted unpredictably, stirring clouds of dust. He paused, letting his eyes sweep the landscape. Noticed the subtle sway of a distant bush and the quiver of heat mirages rising. From the ground, his finger eased over the trigger. Ping! Another perfect hit. Sergeant Miller's knuckles whitened on his rifle. This isn't possible," he muttered under his breath. His Marines looked to him for guidance, yet there was none to give. The authority he once commanded had been upended, not with force, but with precision, patience, and an unshakable calm. By the time Bruce engaged the fourth target at 1,100 yards, partially hidden behind the rise, the sun had dropped lower, bathing the range in a golden glow. Sweat stung the older man's eyes, but he ignored it. This was no longer a casual exercise. It was a conversation between a master and the untested. Ping! Another perfect strike. A low whistle escaped one of the Marines, involuntarily acknowledging skill beyond their comprehension. The fifth target loomed, 1,200 yards, a mere pinprick against the vast desert backdrop. The wind gusted now unpredictably, threatening the delicate balance required for a flawless shot. Bruce closed his eyes briefly, feeling the breeze on his skin, recalling years of combat, the jungles, the mud, the endless hours of reading wind and distance as if they were old friends. He exhaled, steadied, and fired. The shot echoed like a final chord, and the steel target responded with a crystalline ping. Silence descended again, heavier than before. No one breathed, except the old man, lying prone, chest rising and falling with quiet authority. The young Marines' mouths hung open. They had witnessed the impossible. 5 perfect shots on 5 targets in a single, uninterrupted run. The lesson had been imparted. Unspoken, yet unmistakable, Gunnery Sergeant Davis finally stepped forward. His expression stern but tinged with pride. The Colonel and Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, still arriving from their convoy, shared a glance that spoke volumes. Respect had been earned not with rank, nor youth, nor technology, but with decades of dedication and mastery. Bruce finally rose from the mat. The weight of the M1, a familiar comfort against his shoulder. His eyes, calm and deep, scanned the squad of young Marines, their arrogance replaced by humbled astonishment. "The rifle doesn't make the Marine," he said softly. "The Marine makes the rifle. Remember that." The desert seemed almost sacred now. The echoes of Bruce's perfect shots lingering in the hot air. The young Marines, previously brimming with youthful arrogance, were silent, their posture stiff with a mix of disbelief and newfound respect. Sergeant Miller, in particular, felt the sting of humility as he watched Bruce methodically clear his rifle. The old man's movements were deliberate, each click and slide of the bolt a symphony of experience. Bruce finally stood, the rifle held loosely at his side, and turned to face the squad. His eyes, pale and steady, scanned each Marine. There was no triumph in his gaze, only measured authority. "You see," he said softly, "the rifle doesn't teach you courage, precision, or patience. It merely listens. You make the decisions your heart, your discipline, your focus make the Marine." A subtle shift rippled through the squad. The younger men, whose confidence had been built on gadgets in youth, now confronted a tangible embodiment of skill, patience, and wisdom. Some of them stared at Bruce, silently questioning how their training could ever measure up. Sergeant Miller's jaw clenched, his face hot. He wanted to argue, to reassert his authority, but Bruce's calm presence held him in check. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a recognition that the old man's experience transcended rank, every detail. From the way Bruce checked the wind to how he adjusted his stance, spoke of decades where lives and missions depended on such precision. Gunnery Sergeant Davis stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Listen closely, Marines. What you just witnessed isn't a spectacle. It's a lesson in humility, in mastery, in the value of learning from those who've walked this path before you. Respect isn't earned by showing off. It's earned by diligence, integrity, and understanding the chain of those who came before you." Bruce, still standing, allowed himself a small smile. His thoughts drifted back decades earlier, to the young Marines he had once trained at Paris Island. He remembered the anxious eyes, the nervous hands, the eagerness to prove themselves. He had been patient with them, guiding them to understand that the rifle was not an extension of ego, but of the mind and body working in harmony. Today, the lesson was repeating itself, decades later. On a sun-baked range in California, Sergeant Miller, finally stepping forward, cleared his throat. His voice was quiet but steady. "Sir, I apologize for my arrogance, for mocking you, for disrespecting what you represent." Bruce's eyes softened, recognizing genuine remorse. "Good," he said. "Now understand this. The pride you hold is only useful when it serves the team, the Corps, and those who came before you, not yourself." The squad watched, absorbed, as Bruce and Miller shared a rare, silent moment of mutual acknowledgement. It was a transfer of respect, not granted by rank, but earned through recognition of skill, wisdom, and humility. As Bruce prepared to leave the range, he cast a final glance at the steel targets, now gleaming under the late afternoon sun. Each ping of the bullet still echoed in the minds of the Marines. A lingering reminder that true mastery could not be rushed, simulated, or replicated through modern gadgets alone. Later, the Colonel and Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne arrived, their expressions a mix of awe and restrained pride. They didn't need to speak. The scene before them, an old legend quietly imparting lessons to the next generation, said it. All Bruce's presence had turned a routine training exercise into a profound demonstration of what it meant to be a Marine. Transcending technology, rank, and age, the wind had shifted slightly, carrying the dry, sun-warmed scent of the desert across the range. Bruce Warren remained calm, walking slowly between the steel targets, inspecting each one with the practiced eye of a master. His hand brushed over the faint dents and pockmarks left by decades of shooting. Every scar told a story of patience, survival, and precision. Colonel Matthews and Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne arrived just in time to witness the final moments of Bruce's demonstration. Their presence alone altered the energy on the range. Young Marines straightened, their earlier disbelief giving way to reverent attention. Even Sergeant Miller's earlier bravado was muted, replaced by a nervous anticipation. He realized that he was standing in the presence of a living legend, a man whose very reputation had shaped the scout sniper school. Bruce finished his inspection and turned toward the approaching officers. There was no grand gesture, no show of ego. He simply nodded politely, acknowledging their arrival while still maintaining focus on the targets. Colonel Matthews' eyes, sharp and commanding, softened for a fraction of a second as he recognized the man before him, Bruce Warren, whose exploits were etched into Marine Corps' history. "Sir," Bruce said quietly, not looking at the colonel, "everything is in order." His voice carried the weight of decades of experience, yet there was a humility that made his authority absolute without demanding it. Thorne stepped closer, his gaze evaluating, not judging. "Indeed," he murmured. "It's as we remembered. Precision, patience, mastery." The young Marines, witnessing this interaction, were struck by the contrast. They had relied on modern technology, ballistic computers, advanced optics, carbon fiber bipods, but here was a man proving that true marksmanship transcended any tool. It was a combination of instinct, experience, and deep understanding of the weapon and environment. Colonel Matthews finally spoke, his voice carrying across the range, firm but respectful. "Marines, you have witnessed something extraordinary today. You have seen the standard you aspire to. Bruce Warren is not merely a veteran. He is the benchmark of excellence in marksmanship. Every rule, every technique you learn, was influenced by men like him. Understand that, and carry it forward in every action, every shot, every mission." Sergeant Miller swallowed hard, feeling a wave of shame and enlightenment. For the first time, he grasped that leadership and skill were not measured by gadgets or youthful bravado, but by discipline, humility, and the ability to inspire respect without demanding it. Bruce finally allowed himself a small smile. Turning to Miller, "Remember, son, the rifle doesn't make the Marine. The Marine makes the rifle. Pride is fine, but never let it blind you to the value of those standing beside you." Miller nodded, committing the lesson to memory. As Bruce collected his rifle and began walking toward the exit of the range, the sunlight caught on the polished steel of the distant targets. Each ping of his earlier shots seemed to echo in the minds of the young Marines, a reminder of the standards they were now expected to honor. The Colonel and Thorne followed, leaving the Marines to absorb the lesson. Quiet reflection replaced chatter. Even the hottest sun of the afternoon could not compete with the heat of this revelation, the profound realization that they had just been in the presence of a master who had shaped the very doctrines they now studied and executed. The desert heat had softened into a dry warmth as Bruce Warren began moving, Toward the exit of the range, his steps were measured, each one carrying the weight of decades spent in foxholes, training grounds, and combat zones. Every Marine present felt the gravity of the moment. It wasn't simply that they had witnessed a legendary shooter, but that they had been part of a lesson that transcended shooting. Sergeant Miller remained rooted in place. Unable to look away, he replayed the sequence in his mind, the perfect hits, the calm control, the effortless mastery over rifle and wind. It was humbling. Bruce had demonstrated not just skill, but patience, discipline, and a profound understanding of respect for the rifle, the target, and those around him. The other Marines began to stir, their initial shock giving way to quiet murmurs of admiration. Each man reflected on the arrogance he had brought to the line that morning, now replaced by a newfound sense of humility. Bruce's exit was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if each footfall was a silent mark etched into their consciousness. Colonel Matthews and Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne followed at a measured pace, maintaining the solemnity of the occasion. Matthews glanced at the young Marines. "Remember this moment," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command and respect. "It isn't about the rifle. It's about your discipline, your focus, your ability to listen and observe. Every one of you will carry what you learned today for the rest of your careers." Bruce paused at the edge of the firing line, glancing back once, his pale blue eyes meeting the gaze of Sergeant Miller. In that silent exchange, there was no pride, no arrogance, only understanding. The torch of experience had been passed, not through words, but through presence and performance. A gentle breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of gunpowder and sun-baked dust. Bruce adjusted the strap of his rifle over his shoulder and continued walking. Each step seemed to leave a lasting impression on those watching, a reminder that mastery was as much about character as it was about talent. The young Marines found themselves speaking in hushed tones, comparing observations, dissecting every movement, every decision Bruce had made. They realized that the old man's success had been built on a lifetime of listening to the rifle, to the environment, and to the lessons of those who had come before him. Sergeant Miller finally shook himself out of the daze, his previous arrogance replaced by reverence. He understood now that respect was earned, not assumed. Bruce's words echoed in his mind. The Marine makes the rifle. Pride should be in your brothers, not yourself. As Bruce disappeared beyond the edge of the range, the colonel's voice rang out, crisp and commanding. "Marines, line up. Attention. Today's lesson is complete, but the real work begins now. Take what you've seen and apply it. Remember the man. Remember his discipline. Remember the humility." For the remainder of the afternoon, the young Marines did not speak much. They cleaned their weapons meticulously, studied their previous mistakes, and took careful notes on wind reading, posture, and focused out. The echo of Bruce Warren's presence lingered, a silent reminder of what true excellence looked like. The following morning, the barracks were unusually quiet. Whispers traveled along the rows of bunks and lockers, each Marine replaying the events of the previous day. Bruce Warren's flawless run had become the talk of the base, and the story spread with a mix of awe and disbelief. Even the most confident young Marines found themselves second-guessing their own abilities. The arrogance of yesterday replaced by a tentative humility. Sergeant Miller walked through the hallways, each step a reminder of the lesson he had received. He could feel the weight of scrutiny in every glance from his peers. The museum-based remedial honor training had begun, and it was as if Bruce's presence had seeped into every corner of the base. A silent yet inescapable authority, the base historian, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun, welcomed the group of young NCOs into the museum. Rows of glass display cases glimmered under the bright fluorescent lights, each containing medals, photographs, and artifacts from veterans long past. She guided them from display to display, recounting stories of valor, innovation, and dedication. Every plaque was a testament to the history of the Corps. And each story echoed the lesson Bruce had imparted. Greatness was built over time, through discipline, courage, and humility. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a faded photograph of a young Marine in World War II uniform. He faced impossible odds, and yet his focus and integrity never wavered. That is the standard Bruce Warren lived by, and that is the standard you will carry forward. The Marines nodded, some out of respect, some out of the realization that they had underestimated the legacy they were now part of. Sergeant Miller lingered near a case displaying long-range rifles similar to Bruce's. Tracing the outline of one familiar stock with his finger, his thoughts returned to the firing line, to the calm control of Bruce's hands, the rhythmic breathing, the perfect hits. He could almost hear the echoes of each metallic ping, a haunting reminder of yesterday's humility lesson. Across the base, Bruce spent the day quietly, walking among the training fields and observing exercises from a distance. He did not interfere or instruct, but his presence was enough to shift the atmosphere. Younger Marines watched him from afar, whispering to one another, marveling at the contrast between the grizzled veteran and their own technological marvels. By late afternoon, the platoon had completed their first full day of honor training. Their hands were raw from polishing display cases, and their notebooks were filled with the names and stories of those who had come before. Sergeant Miller, more than anyone, felt the transformation. He had begun to understand that respect, focus, and dedication were not optional. They were essential. As the sun began to dip behind the hills surrounding the base, a quiet reverence settled over the museum. Each Marine reflected individually on the lessons of the day. Bruce's demonstration was more than marksmanship. It was a living example of the chain of mentorship, of carrying forward knowledge from one generation to the next. That evening, Sergeant Miller returned to the range. The steel targets, now bathed in the orange glow of sunset, were empty, yet the memory of Bruce Warren's shots lingered. Miller carefully adjusted his own rifle, mindful of wind and stance, replaying every subtle movement he had observed. There was no arrogance, no haste, only the patient application of knowledge and respect for the weapon and the craft. By nightfall, the platoon had gathered again. The quiet transformation was evident. Conversations were thoughtful, and corrections were offered with care rather than derision. The ripple effect of Bruce's visit had begun to change the culture. Subtly but unmistakably, the veteran's presence, though largely invisible, had left a mark as indelible as the crescent-shaped scar on Bruce's rifle. The following week, the barracks had settled into a rhythm. Sergeant Miller and his squad now carried the weight of the previous lessons, but they also bore a quiet curiosity. How could one man, decades older and wielding a relic of a rifle, outperform the latest technology and youth itself? Bruce Warren had agreed to stay for a few days, not to lead formal training, but to observe, correct, and quietly guide the young Marines in ways they could scarcely anticipate. The morning began with the sun low over the California hills, casting long golden streaks across the range. Bruce stood silently at the edge, his posture erect yet relaxed, eyes scanning the horizon with decades of experience packed into every glance. Sergeant Miller approached, rifle in hand, still carrying the nervousness and humility that Bruce had instilled in him. "Sir, we're ready for your guidance," Miller said, voice steady but slightly reverent. Bruce's pale blue eyes met his, calm yet penetrating, and he gave a slow nod. Bruce began with the basics, though not in the way they expected. There were no complex ballistic calculators, no computerized tracking systems. Instead, he instructed each Marine to feel the rifle as an extension of their own body, to listen to the wind, watch the mirage, and observe subtle environmental cues. "The rifle is your partner," he said, "not your crutch. Your senses, your instincts, those are what make you deadly." The young Marines, initially skeptical, began to sense the depth of his wisdom. One by one, Bruce took them through exercises designed to test not just marksmanship, but patience, observation, and control. He had them kneel on simple mats, observe distant targets, and estimate wind speed and direction using natural indicators, a swaying branch, a ripple of dust, the shimmer of heat on the earth. Miller found himself paired with Bruce for individual guidance. The older man's hands moved over Miller's rifle, adjusting posture, grip, and cheek weld. You think you know how to hold it, but your body is betraying you, Bruce murmured. Relax, breathe, become one with the weapon. Hours passed in the sweltering sun, sweat-dampened uniforms, and the metallic taste of concentration hung in the air. The young Marines learned to slow their minds, to focus on the imperceptible rather than the obvious. Bruce never shouted, never displayed impatience. His authority radiated from presence alone. By late afternoon, the exercises escalated. Bruce led them to a simulated scenario. 5 steel targets at varying distances, exposed to shifting crosswinds. No computers. No scopes with ballistic corrections. Just eyes, intuition, and the feel of the rifle. Each Marine took turns, the results uneven, their frustrations evident. Bruce watched silently, allowing failure to teach patience. Finally, it was Sergeant Miller's turn. Bruce positioned himself beside him, whispering subtle cues. Feel the wind. Don't force the shot. Let the rifle speak. Miller inhaled deeply, feeling the rifle's weight against his shoulder, the pulse of the stock in his hands. His previous arrogance had been stripped away. He now understood that mastery was earned, not assumed. He fired 5 rounds, each hitting its mark with near-perfect precision. The platoon erupted in quiet awe. The other Marines watched, some in disbelief, some with newfound respect. Bruce didn't smile or gloat. He simply observed, serene, the embodiment of decades of discipline and skill. The transfer of knowledge had begun, not just the technical aspects, but the intangible lesson of humility, patience, and respect for both the weapon and the history it carried. By dusk, the platoon gathered to hear Bruce speak. Remember this, he said softly, his voice carrying over the desert winds. Pride in yourself is fleeting. Pride in the corps, in your brothers, and in those who came before, those are eternal. Carry this knowledge forward, and you will honor every Marine who came before you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the young Marines walked back to their bunks transformed. Sergeant Miller lingered, looking once more at Bruce, understanding that the day had been about far more than rifles. It had been about values, legacy, and the subtle art of mentorship. The final day of Bruce Warren's visit arrived with a calm, almost reverential stillness over the base. The young Marines had spent the past week absorbing lessons they hadn't anticipated, lessons that went beyond marksmanship and tactics, reaching into patience, humility, and respect for the generations of men who had built the Marine Corps. Bruce had requested a private session with Sergeant Miller before the day's exercises. Son, today isn't about proving skill, Bruce said, his voice low but firm. It's about understanding what it means to carry the torch. Miller nodded, feeling the weight of the phrase in a way he never had before. The Reaper's Gauntlet range was set up one last time. 5 steel targets, stretching from 800 to 1,200 yards. The young Marines were to attempt the run again, this time applying every lesson Bruce had imparted. Bruce observed silently, his old M1A resting beside him. He noticed the subtle changes. Marines who once rushed, now paused. Marines who once scoffed, now considered. Eyes that once brimmed with arrogance, now held respect. Miller was the first to step up. His breathing was measured, his posture exact. Every adjustment, every observation, reflected the week's training. Bruce's eyes followed each movement, noting precision, patience, and understanding. The first shot rang out ping. Second ping, Third ping. Fourth ping. Fifth ping. A clean run. A murmur of astonishment swept through the platoon. Next came the other Marines, each executing with more focus and steadiness than they had thought possible. Bruce offered guidance sparingly, letting them internalize their own growth. By mid-morning, the platoon had completed the gauntlet multiple times, the sound of each successful ping echoing like a chorus of accomplishment across the range. At noon, Bruce called the group together. The young Marines, now sweat-dampened and fatigued, formed a semicircle around him. "You've learned more than marksmanship," he said, voice calm but commanding. "You've learned the value of humility, patience, and respect. Remember, the rifle doesn't make the Marine. The Marine makes the rifle. Your strength lies not in the gun, but in your heart, your mind, and your brotherhood." Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Sir, thank you for everything." Bruce placed a hand on Miller's shoulder, his touch both gentle and grounding. "Carry this forward, son. Honor those who came before, and teach those who come after. That is how a legacy survives." As the sun began its descent, casting warm golden hues over the range, Bruce picked up his M1A. With deliberate steps, he walked to the first target, checked his scope one last time, and fired. The shot rang out, clear and precise, a final echo of a lifetime spent mastering craft and character. The Marines watched in quiet reverence. Later, at the base mess hall, the platoon shared a simple meal. Bruce spoke to them not as a legend or a hero, but as a mentor. He recounted stories of past battles, of instructors who had shaped him, and the men he had guided. Each tale carried a lesson, a subtle thread connecting the past to the present. By evening, Bruce prepared to leave. Colonel Matthews and Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne arrived to see him off, their salutes deep, reflective of decades of respect for a man whose name had become synonymous with excellence. The platoon lined the perimeter, a silent honor guard, understanding that they had witnessed more than training. They had witnessed a living history lesson, a standard to aspire to for the rest of their careers. Sergeant Miller approached Bruce one last time. "Sir, I won't forget today, or this week. You've changed how I see the corps, and myself." Bruce nodded, his pale blue eyes holding both pride and quiet finality. "Remember, Sergeant, you now carry the torch. Don't let it dim. Teach what you've learned. Protect what matters. That is the duty of every Marine." As Bruce departed, the base seemed to hold its breath for a moment, honoring a man whose lifetime of mastery, humility, and wisdom had left an indelible mark. The legacy of Bruce Warren was no longer just a story. It lived in the eyes, the hands, and the hearts of the Marines he had guided.